For over a decade, we watched them build a life, a sprawling, complicated, and utterly captivating dynasty under the harsh glare of reality television. We were sold a vision of faith, of family, of a collective bound by a principle greater than themselves. But behind the carefully curated smiles and the seemingly chaotic but loving homes, a secret was festering, a betrayal so profound, so insidious, it didn't just break a family apart. It hollowed it out from the inside, leaving behind a ghost of what it once claimed to be. This isn't a story about a simple marital breakdown or the challenges of a plural lifestyle. This is a story about a systematic campaign of emotional abandonment, a father who became a stranger to his own children, and the slow, agonizing death of a family's soul, orchestrated by the very man who swore to protect it. The story you are about to hear will change the way you see this family forever. It is the result of a deep dive into years of public statements, explosive book revelations, and the heartbreaking testimony of the children who were left behind. We are going to unpack the evidence, follow the trail of emotional devastation, and expose how a patriarch's neglect became a weapon of mass destruction, leaving a legacy of trauma that continues to unfold in the most tragic ways imaginable. The core allegation at the heart of this story is not one of financial fraud in the traditional sense, but of a far more personal and damaging heist, the theft of a father. We will detail how Kody Brown, with his fourth wife Robyn as his primary accomplice, systematically divested his time, his affection, his resources, and ultimately his very presence from his first 13 children, creating a wound so deep that it has led to a near total estrangement. The victims in this story are not just the 3 women he spiritually divorced. They are the children who grew up with a phantom for a father, the ones who screamed for his help and were met with silence, the ones who now look at the man who gave them life and see only a stranger. Before we pull back the curtain on this devastating saga, if you believe in holding powerful figures accountable and giving a voice to those who have been silenced, take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and ring that notification bell. Your support is what allows us to bring these hidden stories to light, and with the constant stream of new revelations, you are not going to want to miss a single update on this unraveling family crisis. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you first have to understand the illusion that was sold to the world, the foundational principle upon which the Brown family empire was built. It was the idea of one family, indivisible, a collective unit where resources, both financial and emotional, were pooled for the good of all. In the early days, in the single sprawling house in Lehi, Utah, this system, at least on the surface, appeared to work. The children, a tumbling, chaotic, and joyful pack of siblings, were raised communally. Christine, as she has detailed extensively, was the basement wife, the primary caregiver for not just her own 6 children, but for all of them. She was the one making breakfast, packing lunches, and running the household while Janelle worked and Mary and Kody often traveled. Kody was the patriarch, the charismatic, energetic center of their universe, and the kids, in their youthful innocence, adored him. He was the fun dad, the one who wrestled and played, the unifying figurehead of their unconventional life. Sources from that era, including the family's own early writings, paint a picture of a functional, if stressed, collective. The idea that Kody would one day completely abandon the majority of his children would have been unthinkable back then. He preached a doctrine of shared sacrifice and eternal reward. The family pot wasn't just about money, it was an emotional and spiritual contract. Each wife and child was a stakeholder in this grand experiment. Christine, in particular, was the bedrock of this system. She was the one who truly lived the principle, who believed that her value was tied to her service to the entire family. She raised Janelle's kids as her own, she created the home environment that allowed the family to function, and she did it all believing she was building a celestial kingdom on earth with a loving husband at its head. The early seasons of their television show cemented this image. We saw the morning rush, the family meetings, the struggles and triumphs of a massive family navigating life together. The premiere of the show brought a new level of financial stability, and for a moment it seemed like their sacrifices were paying off. They had a platform, they had a voice, and they had a future. But even then, there were cracks in the foundation, signs that Kody's commitment to the collective was conditional. He often worked out of town, a pattern that began long before the cameras started rolling. According to Christine's own book, his one-on-one time with his children was shockingly limited, often reserved for a single outing on their birthday each year. It was a system that relied almost entirely on the wives, particularly Christine, to fill the massive void left by his frequent absences. He used the very structure of polygamy not as a way to build a larger, more supported family, but as a license for paternal absenteeism. He felt he didn't have to be there. He didn't have to change diapers or help with homework or deal with the day-to-day grind of parenting because the women could do it themselves. It was a convenient excuse, a theological loophole that allowed him to be the celebrated figurehead without being the present, engaged father his children desperately needed. The illusion was powerful both for the audience and for the family itself. They believed in the dream of one big happy family, even as the architect of that dream was already laying the groundwork for its demolition. They were all contributing to a pot of love and effort, believing it would nourish them all. They had no idea that soon a new stakeholder would arrive who would convince the CEO to drain the entire account for a private venture, leaving the original investors emotionally bankrupt. The arrival of Robyn Sullivan marked the pivot point, the seismic event that would trigger the slow, deliberate dismantling of the original Brown family. While the family narrative has always been that Robyn's introduction was a beautiful addition, the evidence, laid bare over years of footage and recent testimony, proves it was, in fact, an acquisition. Kody didn't just add a fourth wife, he started a new, separate family, and the first 13 children became the collateral damage. This is where the seeds of conspiracy were sown. The geographical move from Utah to Las Vegas was the first major step. It created 4 separate homes, 4 separate lives, and shattered the communal living that had, by necessity, forced Kody to at least be physically present in the lives of all his children. The cul-de-sac was a clever illusion of togetherness, but in reality, it was the beginning of 4 distinct kingdoms, and it quickly became apparent that Kody was only interested in ruling one. It was here that Kody and Robyn began to push a false narrative, not of financial scarcity, but of emotional and temporal scarcity. Suddenly, Kody was spread too thin. He was overwhelmed. His time became the most precious commodity in the family, and a fierce, unspoken competition for it began. But the competition was rigged from the start. This is where the secretive actions, the emotional equivalent of forming a shell company, began. The legal marriage to Robyn and the adoption of her 3 children was presented to the world and to the family as a noble act of securing their place in the family. Mary's sacrifice of her legal status was framed as the ultimate act of selflessness. But in hindsight, it was a brutal corporate maneuver. It was the legal mechanism that began the process of officially consolidating Kody's resources, both legal and emotional, under one roof, Robyn's. Dabsark Entertainment LLC, the family's shared business entity, may have existed on paper, but the real power structure was shifting. Kody and Robyn were forming their own private emotional corporation, a fortress built to protect their new nuclear family at the expense of the larger one. A legal expert analyzing the situation, even from a purely relational standpoint, would describe this as a strategic consolidation of assets. Kody's attention, his decision-making power, and his daily presence were systematically transferred from the collective to the private entity of his life with Robyn and her children. The other wives and children were demoted from partners to, at best, distant satellite offices, expected to contribute to the parent company but receive little to no investment in return. The narrative of scarcity was the perfect cover. By constantly complaining about how hard it was to manage 4 households, Kody justified his retreat into the one household where he felt the most comfortable, the one that demanded the least from him emotionally and catered to him the most. The other children began to notice. They saw their father, who used to be a constant, if shared, presence, becoming a visitor in their own homes. The seeds of resentment were planted, not by the children, but by a father who was teaching them through his actions that they were no longer a priority. The grand family experiment was over. A hostile takeover was in progress. The mechanics of this emotional deception were as calculated as any financial shell game. Kody's primary asset, his time, was systematically rerouted into Robyn's parental, and the gaslighting used to justify it was relentless and cruel. The most glaring example of this, the one that truly exposed the rotten core of the family dynamic, was the implementation of Kody and Robyn's infamous COVID-19 protocols. This was the masterstroke of their campaign of isolation. Under the guise of safety, Kody created a set of impossibly strict rules that he knew his other families, particularly Janelle's household with her working, social, and independent older sons, could never fully comply with. It was a test of loyalty with only one possible outcome. It was genius in its manipulative simplicity. By framing it as a life or death issue, he could paint anyone who questioned the rules or who couldn't adhere to them perfectly as reckless and uncaring. He wasn't abandoning his children, he was protecting the family. He wasn't showing blatant favoritism, he was rewarding loyalty and respect for his rules. The victims of this gaslighting, his own sons and daughters, were left completely bewildered and heartbroken. We watched Gabe break down in tears, recounting how his father forgot his birthday, choosing the pandemic protocols over a simple, socially distanced interaction with his own child. We saw Garrison, a young man who had joined the National Guard, being treated like a pariah in his own family. Kody used their desire for normal lives, for girlfriends and jobs, as a weapon against them, accusing them of not caring about the family's safety when, in reality, they were just trying to live. The money seemed to be drying up for everyone else, both emotionally and, as we now know, financially. But the money trail, the one that tracked Kody's time and affection, led directly and exclusively to one place: Robyn's multi-million-dollar mansion. While Janelle was living in an RV on a barren plot of land, and Christine was struggling to feel like she even had a husband, Kody was playing house with Robyn and their two youngest children, Solomon and Ariella. He became a full-time, present, and engaged father to them, the very thing he had denied his other 13 children for their entire lives. He was there for every milestone, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. This wasn't just a redistribution of his time, it was a complete and total reallocation. The other children received nothing. The heartbreaking impact of this deliberate neglect is best exemplified by one jaw-dropping, monstrous story of abandonment that Christine finally revealed in her book. When their daughter, Truly, was just 3 years old, she fell gravely ill with what would later be diagnosed as acute kidney failure. She was lethargic, her eyes were crossing, and she was clearly in distress. Christine, terrified, was at home with her, while her teenage daughter Aspen was tasked with watching her. In the Las Vegas cul-de-sac, Kody and Robyn lived literally across the street. The distance was no more than 10 feet. A panicked Aspen, 16 at the time, called her father, begging him to come over and help. She knew something was seriously wrong with her little sister. Kody refused. He would not walk the 10 feet across the street to help his panicking teenage daughter with his deathly ill 3-year-old toddler. His excuse? He was busy. He was helping his favorite son, Solomon, with a school project. Let that sink in. A father chose a craft project with his favorite child over the potential life-or-death emergency of another. He left 2 of his daughters, a teenager and a toddler, to fend for themselves in a medical crisis because he could not be bothered to cross the street. It was Christine who eventually rushed home, and seeing the state Truly was in, took her to the hospital where she would spend 11 days fighting for her life. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a simple case of being spread too thin. This was a conscious, cold, and calculated choice. It was the ultimate statement of prioritization, a glaring neon sign pointing to where his loyalties lay. He was building a new life with Robyn, and the children of his past were inconvenient, disposable relics of a life he was actively trying to forget. The gaslighting, the emotional shell game, the cruel prioritization, it was all part of the same strategy, to bleed the old family dry to nourish the new one. For years, the children suffered in relative silence, their pain and confusion occasionally bubbling to the surface on camera, only to be dismissed or twisted by their father. But the truth, like a river, will always find a way to the sea. The discovery of the full extent of Kody's betrayal wasn't a single event, but a slow, agonizing dawning, a series of loose threads that, when pulled, unraveled the entire tapestry of their family. The initial crack for many of the older children was simply the process of growing up. As teenagers and young adults, they began to see their father not through the adoring eyes of a child, but with the clarity of near strangers. They started comparing notes. They realized their shared experience wasn't a series of isolated incidents, but a consistent, deliberate pattern of neglect. The kids, when the cameras were off, came to view Kody as, in their own words, just some guy that would show up every once in a while. This painful realization was the first step in their collective, independent investigation. They began to see the hypocrisy with their own eyes. They saw the expensive cars Kody drove, the designer clothes Robyn wore, the lavish lifestyle they enjoyed in their sprawling home, and they contrasted it with their own realities. This is where the financial neglect becomes inextricably linked with the emotional abandonment. Mykelti, who for years was Kody and Robyn's most loyal defender, recently dropped a bombshell that confirmed what many had suspected for years. She testified publicly on her Patreon that Kody did not use his substantial income from the show for the basic needs of his children. His salary did not go into a family pot for food, housing, or clothing for the OG-13. That money, his money, was spent on his own luxuries. Mykelti recounted how Kody's very first paycheck from the show went not to his struggling families, but to a down payment on a Lexus convertible for himself. Today, he drives an expensive Mercedes. This wasn't a father struggling to provide for a large family. This was a man using his family to fund his own lifestyle, while leaving the mothers to figure out how to feed and clothe his children. This financial truth was a smoking gun for the kids. It proved that their father's narrative of scarcity was a complete and utter lie. He didn't lack resources. He lacked the will to share them. For Christine, the ultimate smoking gun, the piece of evidence that turned her simmering suspicion into cold, hard certainty, was Kody's refusal to travel with her for their daughter Ysabel's major back surgery. For years, Ysabel had suffered from debilitating scoliosis. The surgery was a terrifying, life-altering event for her, and she begged her father to be there. Kody refused, citing COVID protocols as his excuse. Yet, at the same time, he was comfortable officiating a friend's wedding, maskless and in close contact with others. The hypocrisy was staggering. He would not be there for his daughter during one of the most frightening moments of her life, but he would be there for a friend's party. For Christine, this was the final betrayal. It was the moment she understood that there was nothing she could do, nothing her children could do to ever earn his love and presence back. He was gone. This realization sparked the formation of a new, powerful alliance. Christine and Janelle, along with their children, began to talk in secret, comparing notes, validating each other's pain, and realizing they were not alone. They had all been victims of the same emotional heist. The quiet whispers of dissent grew into a chorus of rebellion. The stage was set for a confrontation that would be more explosive, more raw, and more real than anything viewers had ever seen. The reckoning was coming. The reckoning, when it finally arrived, was not a single event but a series of seismic confrontations that shattered the carefully constructed facade of the Brown family. It played out on national television, a slow-motion demolition of a patriarch's authority. The first and most significant confrontation was Christine's. After years of being ignored, dismissed, and emotionally starved, she finally confronted Kody with the simple, devastating truth. She was leaving him. The scene in her empty living room, with Kody reeling in disbelief, was a masterclass in the psychology of a narcissist finally facing a consequence. His initial denial quickly morphed into rage. He couldn't comprehend that one of his wives would dare to choose her own happiness and the happiness of her children over his comfort. His defense was a torrent of gaslighting and blame-shifting. He accused her of betrayal, of breaking a sacred covenant, of not trying hard enough to have a good relationship with Robyn. He simply could not see his own role in the collapse of their marriage. Then came Janelle's moment, the firecracker, the one no one saw coming. During a heated argument about the older boys and the COVID rules, Janelle, pushed to her breaking point, finally unleashed decades of pent-up frustration. When Kody demanded that she kick her sons out of her house to prove her loyalty to him, she looked him dead in the eye and said, "F you!" It was a moment of pure, unadulterated rebellion. But the most telling confrontation, the one that exposed the core of Kody's warped philosophy, was the family meeting where he screamed at his children. He raged about respect, about loyalty, about being the head of the family. It was in these moments of uncontrolled anger that his guilt slipped out. He famously made the distinction between our money and my money, a Freudian slip that revealed his true mindset. The family pot was a myth. It was always his money to be doled out as he saw fit. He lamented that his wives had formed a club where they complained about their deadbeat husband, inadvertently admitting that their complaints were valid. His defense was always the same. He was just trying to protect the family, especially his little children. Solomon and Ariella. This defense only further incensed the victims. He was using his two youngest children as human shields, implying that his love and protection for them justified his neglect and abuse of the others. Are you hearing this? The unmitigated gall of a man who abandons a dozen children and then claims it was all for the good of the two he kept. Their decision to lawyer up was not a legal filing in a traditional court, but a strategic decision to take their case to the court of public opinion. The show, Christine's book, and the tell-all specials became their legal briefs. The motivation was clear: justice for their children. They were reclaiming the narrative, presenting their evidence to the world, and letting the public serve as the jury. The legal arguments, if they were filed in a court, would be staggering. Breach of fiduciary duty for a man who controlled the family finances for his own benefit. Fraudulent conveyance for the emotional and financial assets he funneled to one household. Unjust enrichment. Civil conspiracy for the way he and Robyn worked in tandem to isolate themselves and hoard resources, and most significantly, intentional infliction of emotional distress. An expert legal analyst looking at this case would not see it as a simple family dispute. They would see it as the dissolution of a corporation, where the majority shareholders were systematically defrauded by a corrupt CEO and his partner. It was not a marital issue, it was a fundamental betrayal of a partnership agreement that had been in place for decades. The confrontation was over, and the trial was about to begin. The courtroom, in this case, was the television screen in millions of homes, and the trial has been playing out for the last several seasons. The tension with each new episode and each new tell-all is thick enough to cut with a knife. The plaintiffs, Christine and Janelle, have methodically presented their case, with their adult children serving as their key witnesses. Their evidence is not a stack of dusty legal documents, but something far more powerful. Years of footage capturing the slow decay of their family, their own emotional testimonies, and the corroborating statements of their children. The most compelling evidence has come directly from the mouths of the victims. Christine's testimony, both on the show and in her book, has been a masterclass in quiet strength. Recounting the horror of Truly's kidney failure and Kody's refusal to help was a gut punch to the audience. Her voice, trembling but firm, as she described Kody's choice to abandon Ysabel before her surgery, painted a portrait of a man so devoid of empathy that it was chilling. This was not a wife complaining. This was a mother laying bare the wounds inflicted upon her children. Then came the testimony of the children themselves, the ultimate insiders. Gabe's tearful confession about his father forgetting his birthday, Garrison's stoic pain at being ostracized, Pedon's blunt, unfiltered interviews where he admitted he never felt like his father's son. But the trial's bombshell witness, the one who blew the lid off years of manipulation and deceit, was Mykelti. For years, Mykelti was Team Kody and Robyn. She lived with them, she defended them, she was the bridge between the two sides of the family. Her turning on them was the ultimate betrayal in their eyes, but the ultimate validation for her siblings. Her public testimony on Patreon was the equivalent of a star witness taking the stand and recanting everything. She testified that her father was a stranger. She testified about the financial neglect, confirming the Lexus convertible, and the fact that Kody's show money never went to support the OG kids. She stated unequivocally that she and her siblings have had no contact with Kody and Robyn since Garrison's funeral in March of 2024, illustrating the chasm of estrangement that now exists. This testimony shattered Kody and Robyn's last shred of credibility. If even their most loyal defender now saw the truth, what defense could they possibly have left? Kody and Robyn's defense in this court of public opinion has been weak, inconsistent, and transparently self-serving. In their tell-all segments, they attempt to shift blame, gaslight the audience, and paint themselves as the true victims. Kody's primary defense is that his other wives and children were disrespectful to Robyn. He claims they never accepted her, that they bullied her, and that he was forced to choose a side to protect her. Do you see the manipulation? He frames his abandonment of his children as a noble defense of his favored wife. Robyn's defense is even more insidious. She weeps. She plays the perpetual victim, claiming she always wanted a big, happy family, and that the other wives pushed her away. She speaks of her nest egg, a secret stash of money she kept, a clear admission that she never trusted the family pot system she claimed to cherish. The cross-examination comes from the viewers, the critics, and from us, the investigators who can rewind the tape. We can place his claim of poverty next to the footage of him buying expensive sports cars. We can listen to Robyn cry about wanting sister wives while watching her actively sabotage those relationships. Their own words, their own actions, captured on film for over a decade, are the evidence that convicts them. The smoking gun in this courtroom is their own hypocrisy. Kody preaches about family, loyalty, and patriarchy, while his actions demonstrate that his only loyalty is to his own comfort and to the one wife who provides it without question. The verdict was never really in doubt. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. The verdict has been delivered, not by a judge in a black robe, but by the overwhelming tide of public opinion and, more importantly, by the actions of Kody's own children. The ruling is scathing, and its consequences are devastatingly real. There is no court order demanding the repayment of diverted funds, but the judgment has come in the form of total and complete estrangement. The majority of his older children have cut him off, a silent, powerful statement of solidarity with their mothers, and a damning indictment of his fatherhood. The immediate consequence for Kody and Robyn is a life of gilded isolation. They are trapped in their 5-bedroom, multi-million-dollar mansion, a fortress they built to keep the world out, only to find they have become prisoners within its walls. Their dream of a sprawling patriarchal dynasty is dead. What they have left is a small, insular family unit, financially comfortable but emotionally and socially bankrupt. They are, for all intents and purposes, financially radioactive within their own family structure. The brand they built is now synonymous with dysfunction and betrayal. The long-term consequences are even more dire. The forced sale of the Coyote Pass property, the land that was meant to be the family's promised land, is a perfect metaphor for their shattered dreams. The family is not building homes together. They are liquidating their shared assets to finalize their separation. Kody's legacy, the one thing he seemed to care about above all else, is utterly destroyed. He will not be remembered as the charismatic patriarch who successfully led a plural family into the 21st century. He will be remembered as the man who abandoned his children for a younger wife, the man who preached family values while practicing callous favoritism, the man whose neglect created a chasm of trauma so deep it may never be bridged. The most tragic and irreversible consequence of this long campaign of neglect is the death of their son, Garrison. While we must be incredibly sensitive to the family's grief, it is impossible to analyze the years of emotional abandonment he and his siblings endured without seeing how that pain culminated in the most heartbreaking way possible. His death is the final, terrible exclamation point on a story of a father's failure. For the victims, the verdict is a form of vindication. Christine and Janelle, free from the suffocating weight of their spiritual marriage to Kody, are thriving. We have seen them emerge from the ashes, not as bitter divorcees, but as empowered, joyful women. They are traveling, they are spending time with their children and grandchildren, and they are building new lives on their own terms. Their tears are no longer tears of sorrow, but tears of relief. For them, the truth finally came out, and it set them free. Their children, while still healing from the trauma of their father's abandonment, have risen vindicated and stronger. Their bonds with each other and with their mothers are unbreakable. They have chosen each other, forming a new kind of family, one built not on a flawed patriarchal principle, but on genuine love, mutual respect, and shared experience. The future of the television show hangs in the balance, but the future of the original Brown family is clear. They have restructured, reformed, and found a way to be a family without the man who was once at its center. The illusion has been shattered, and what remains is the painful but ultimately liberating truth. What we have witnessed is more than just the messy implosion of a reality TV family. It is a profound and tragic cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of parental neglect and favoritism. At its core, this is a story about the systematic abuse of power. Kody Brown was entrusted with the hearts and souls of 18 children, and he chose to nurture only a chosen few, leaving the rest to wither from emotional starvation. He used the very structure of his faith, the principle of polygamy, not to build a kingdom for God, but to build a kingdom for himself, with one queen and a court of forgotten children. But the true moral of this story is not found in Kody's failure, but in the incredible resilience of those he left behind. We saw the women of this family, conditioned for years to be silent, obedient, and subservient, find their collective voice, and that voice became a roar. They transformed from victims of a quiet conspiracy into architects of their own liberation. They did not just leave a man, They reclaim their power, their finances, and their futures. The legacy of this family will not be Kody's broken dream. It will be the image of Christine, Janelle, and their children, standing together, stronger and more united than ever before. It will be the story of how they took the rubble of the life that was torn down around them and built something new, something better, something real. It's a testament to the fact that family is not just about blood or marriage or religious covenants. It's about who shows up. It's about who answers the phone when a child is sick. It's about who travels to be there for the scary moments and the joyful ones. It's about who chooses to love consistently and unconditionally. Kody Brown failed that test on every conceivable level. His first 13 children learned a brutal lesson. A father's love can be conditional, it can be revoked, and it can be transferred to a newer model. But they also learned that the love of their mothers and their siblings is a force of nature, powerful enough to heal even the deepest wounds. And that is a truth more powerful than any lie ever told on television. Now, I want to hear from you. What part of this story shocks you the most? Do you believe there is any chance for reconciliation between Kody and his older children? Share your thoughts, your feelings, and your theories in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation, because it's a conversation that matters.